The proclamation ceremony had been running for 6 hours when Governor Whitmore's hand trembled during the blessing of the harvest tithe, and nobody in the cathedral nave seemed to notice except me. I noticed because noticing was my function. 31 years as a senior attestant in the governor's own administrative cohort had trained my eyes to catch the smallest deviation from protocol, the slightest irregularity in form or gesture. The blessing required both hands raised, palms forward, fingers spread in the sign of the Aquila. Governor Whitmore had performed this blessing 17 times in my presence across his 12 years of rule. His hands had never trembled. His fingers had never curled inward at the tips, just slightly, as if responding to some sound beyond human hearing. The incense was particularly thick that day, a new blend commissioned for the harvest festival. Sweet grass and promethium distillate and something else, something I could not quite identify. It reminded me of the nutrient vats in the lower hive, that faintly organic undertone beneath the chemical sharpness. I assumed the new ecclesiarchy attaché had selected an inferior supplier. I made a mental note to file a procurement complaint. Governor Whitmore completed the blessing. The congregation of 9,000 faithful roared their approval. The bells of the Cathedral of the Emperor's Blessed Harvest rang out across the spires of Hive Tertius, and I closed my notation folio and prepared for the processional exit. My colleague Marcus Brennan appeared at my elbow. We had worked together for 18 years, shared an office partition for 12 of them. His face was pale beneath the flickering electro-candles, and sweat beaded at his temples despite the cathedral's carefully regulated temperature. "Did you see it?" he whispered. "See what?" He shook his head quickly, glancing toward the governor's procession as it wound through the nave. "Nothing." "Never mind, I am not feeling well today." "The incense is particularly strong," I agreed. "I will file a complaint." Marcus laughed, but it was wrong. The sound was brittle, high-pitched, nothing like the deep rumble I had known for nearly 2 decades. He gripped my forearm with sudden intensity. "Caroline," he said, using my given name for the first time in years. "Do you remember when we started? Do you remember what they told us during orientation?" I remembered. 31 years was long enough to remember everything, even the things I wished to forget. The orientation for the governor's administrative cohort had lasted 3 months. They had taught us protocol, documentation, the 17 forms of proper address, the 43 categories of tithe assessment. But first, before any of that, they had taught us the signs of corruption. "Deviation from established behavior patterns," I recited quietly. "Unexplained changes in physical presentation. Unusual interest in genetic lineage records. Reluctance to submit to routine bioscreening." Marcus's grip tightened until my bones ached. "When did you last see the governor submit to bioscreening?" The processional hymn swelled around us, thousands of voices raised in praise. I tried to remember. The governor was required to submit to quarterly screening, a standard precaution for any imperial official of sufficient rank. I had filed the scheduling requests myself. I had filed the confirmation receipts. I had never actually seen the governor enter the Medicaid chamber. I had never seen him exit. "The receipts are in order," I said slowly. "I verified them myself." "You verified documents," Marcus said. "Paper, ink, data stamps. You verified what they wanted you to verify." The procession was nearly at the great doors now. Governor Whitmore moved with his usual measured dignity, his ceremonial robes sweeping the ancient stone. From this distance, with the crowd between us, he looked exactly as he always had. Tall, distinguished, perhaps 50 standard years, though the records claimed 43. Hair the color of iron filings, eyes the pale gray of winter sky. But his hand had trembled. His fingers had curled. "Who is they?" I asked, but Marcus was already pulling away, losing himself in the crowd of lesser functionaries filing toward the side exits. I did not see him again for 3 days. The administrative offices of the governor's cohort occupied the 17th through 23rd floors of the spire of blessed administration, a great needle of plasteel and ferrocrete that had pierced the smog layer of Hive Tertius for 8 centuries. My desk overlooked the nutrient processing district, a maze of pipes and vats and recycling towers that fed the 80 million citizens of our particular human anthill. On clear days, which were rare, I could see all the way to the corpse starch refineries at the hive's edge. I spent those 3 days doing my job. I filed tithe assessments. I reviewed petitions for resource allocation. I stamped 17 requests for maintenance servitor reassignment and rejected 43 applications for travel permits to the upper spire. The work was the work, as it had always been, and I told myself that Marcus's strange behavior was simply a symptom of overwork, of the particular madness that sometimes claimed those who spent too long in administrative service. But I could not stop noticing the smell. It was everywhere now, that strange organic undertone I'd first detected in the cathedral incense. It clung to the recycled air of my office. It wafted from the nutrient paste dispensers in the commissary. It seemed strongest in the corridors near the governor's private chambers, where I was sometimes required to deliver priority documents. On the second day, I passed Senior Administrator Chen in the hallway outside the governor's audience chamber. We had worked adjacent divisions for 15 years. She was responsible for population census. I was responsible for tithe compliance. Our departments coordinated on every major assessment. She smiled at me as we passed, and I felt my stomach clench. The smile was wrong. It was too wide, showing too many teeth. Her eyes did not crinkle at the corners the way they should, and beneath the standard issue soap smell that all senior staff shared, beneath the recycled air and the electrostatic of the data slates she carried, there was that other scent, sweetgrass, organic warmth. Something that reminded me of the nutrient vats. Something that reminded me of nothing I had ever actually smelled before. I stopped walking. I turned to watch her continue down the corridor, her gait smooth and unhurried. She did not look back. She rounded the corner toward the governor's private wing, and I stood there in the humming silence of the corridor, my heart beating too fast, my hands shaking the way the governor's hands had shaken during the blessing. When I returned to my office, I locked the door. I pulled the privacy screens across my cogitator terminal, and for the first time in 31 years, I accessed files that were not related to my official duties. The governor's lineage records were exactly where they should be, in the secure archive maintained by the Administratum's genealogical division. I had filing authority for these records as part of my compliance duties. Any discrepancy in noble lineage could affect tithe obligations, inheritance protocols, or succession rights. Accessing them was not technically illegal. It felt illegal. It felt like stepping off the edge of a cliff in the dark. Governor Harrison Whitmore, born in the 973rd year of the 41st millennium, 43 years before the current date. Parents, Lord Castellan Edmund Whitmore and Lady Miriam Whitmore, née Cross. Grandparents, 4 names, all properly documented, all native to Tertius Prime. Great-grandparents, 8 names, records complete, bio-verification stamps intact. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly as it should be. I stared at the screen for a long time. The data stamps were correct. The authentication seals were unbroken. If there was forgery here, it was forgery of a quality I could not detect, produced by forgers with access to Administratum encryption protocols. I almost closed the file. I almost returned to my tithe assessments and tried to forget Marcus's pale face, Chen's too wide smile, the trembling of the governor's hands. But something made me scroll down to the attached documentation, the secondary records that most administrators never bothered to review: birth certificates, medical logs, bio-screening summaries. Governor Whitmore's birth certificate listed his weight as 3.2 kilograms, healthy and normal. His medical logs from infancy showed standard vaccinations, standard growth patterns, standard childhood illnesses. Everything correct. Everything in order. His mother's medical logs from the same period showed a pregnancy of 8 months duration, not 9, 8. I checked the date of Lady Miriam's conception certification against the date of the governor's birth. I calculated the difference 3 times, certain I had made an error. The governor had been born 1 month early, according to official records. Such things happened. Premature births were common enough, especially among the nobility, where inbreeding and genetic drift sometimes complicated reproduction. But premature infants did not weigh 3.2 kilograms. Premature infants were small, underweight, often sickly. The governor's birth weight was appropriate for a full-term pregnancy. Someone had altered the records. Someone had changed the conception date or the birth date or both. Someone had made the numbers fit when they should not have fit. I closed the file. I engaged my office's secondary security protocols, the ones reserved for sensitive internal communications, and I began to search for Marcus Brennan. He was not at his desk. He was not in the commissary, the archive stacks, or the meditation chambers where senior staff sometimes went to calm their minds between shifts. His quarters in the residential block showed no biosignature when I queried the building's monitoring systems. I found his termination notice in the personnel files, dated 2 days after the harvest ceremony. Cause of termination, voluntary separation, health reasons. Destination, Medicaid quarantine, Spire of Blessed Healing, pending long-term treatment for stress-related psychological deterioration. There was no such place. I knew every building, every department, every facility in Hive Tertius. I had filed infrastructure assessments for all of them. The Spire of Blessed Healing did not exist. My hands had stopped shaking. They felt cold now, cold and very still, as if they belonged to someone else. The smell was stronger in my office than it had been before. Sweet grass and warmth and something organic, something alive, something that should not have been present in the sterile, recycled air of an administrative complex. I understood, in that moment, that I had made a terrible mistake. The next morning, I was summoned to the governor's private audience chamber. The chamber was beautiful in the way that all imperial architecture was beautiful, massive, overwhelming, designed to remind the viewer of their own insignificance. The ceiling soared 30 meters overhead, painted with scenes of the Emperor's triumph over the forces of darkness. The walls were lined with portraits of previous governors, 17 generations of noble service stretching back to the planet's founding. Governor Whitmore sat behind a desk of polished darkwood, imported at tremendous expense from a forest world I could not name. He was signing documents when I entered, his pen moving in smooth, practiced strokes. He did not look up. "Senior Attestant Marsh," he said. His voice was exactly as I remembered it, deep, cultured, carrying the faint aristocratic drawl of the upper spires. "Thank you for coming so promptly. Please, sit." I sat in the chair across from his desk. The leather was cold against my back. The smell was overwhelming here, thick and sweet, coating the inside of my nose and throat. "You have been with my administration for 31 years, the governor continued, still signing documents. "An exemplary record, not a single formal reprimand. Your efficiency ratings exceed departmental standards by 23%. "Thank you, my lord. Your colleague Marcus Brennan spoke highly of you before his departure. He mentioned that you were thorough, attentive to detail, the kind of servant the Imperium needs." I said nothing. The governor's pen continued its steady motion, document after document, each one stamped and set aside. "Tell me, Senior Attestant, have you noticed anything unusual lately? Any changes in protocol, in behavior, in the general atmosphere of the hive?" The question was a trap. I knew it was a trap. If I said yes, I would be admitting that I had observed things I should not have observed. If I said no, I would be lying, and he would know I was lying, because he already knew what I had seen. "The incense at the harvest ceremony was different," I said carefully. "I was planning to file a procurement complaint." The governor laughed. It was a warm sound, genuine and rich, exactly the laugh of a man with nothing to hide. He finally looked up from his documents, meeting my eyes for the first time. His eyes were grey, pale grey, like winter sky, exactly as the records described. But somewhere in their depths, just at the edge of visibility, I saw something else, a darkness that moved, a hunger that watched. "The incense is a new blend," he said, "specially commissioned for the harvest season. Do you like it?" "I find it quite pleasant, reminds me of home." "Where is home, my lord?" The question escaped before I could stop it. The governor's smile did not waver, but something shifted behind his eyes, that darkness stirring like a thing that had been sleeping. "Why, right here, Senior Assistant. Tertius Prime is my home. It has been my family's home for 4 generations. 4 generations." He said it so easily, so naturally, as if it were simply a statement of fact, and it was a fact according to the official records. Great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, the governor himself. 4 generations, all native to this world. "Of course, my lord," I said. "I apologize. I do not know why I asked. Stress, perhaps. The harvest season is difficult for everyone. So many assessments, so many documents, so much responsibility." The governor rose from his desk, moving around to stand behind my chair. I felt the pressure of his presence against my back, the strange warmth that radiated from his body. "I worry about my senior staff, Senior Assistant. I want to ensure their well-being, their loyalty." His hands came down on my shoulders, and I had to force myself not to flinch. His fingers were wrong. I could feel it through the fabric of my uniform, through my own skin, through the very structure of my bones. The joints bent in places they should not bend. The grip was too strong, too precisely calibrated, as if each finger were a separate creature making its own decisions about how much pressure to apply. "Marcus Brennan was loyal," the governor said softly, his breath warm against my ear. That smell again, sweetgrass and organic warmth, now mixed with something else, something that made me think of eggs, of spawning pools, of biological processes that had nothing to do with human reproduction. He was loyal, but he was also troubled. He saw patterns that were not there. He made connections that led him to dangerous conclusions. "I understand, my lord. Do you, Senior Assistant?" "I hope so. I truly hope so, because you are valuable to me. You are efficient, thorough, attentive to detail." His fingers tightened, and I felt the bones of my shoulders grind together, and I would hate to lose another valuable servant to unnecessary stress. He released me. He walked back to his desk. He sat down, picked up his pen, and resumed signing documents as if nothing had happened. "You may go, Senior Attestant. Return to your duties. And please do file that procurement complaint about the incense. I value your attention to administrative detail." I left the audience chamber. I walked back to my office. I sat at my desk and stared at my cogitator screen until the shift change bells rang and the evening crew arrived to take over. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that Marcus Brennan was dead, that I would be next if I did not act very carefully, and that the thing behind the governor's eyes was older than 4 generations, older than the noble house of Whitmore, perhaps older than human presence on this world. I had one advantage. The governor did not know I had accessed the lineage records. He suspected, clearly, but he did not know. If he had known, I would already be dead, or worse than dead, taken to whatever place Marcus had been taken to be processed and recycled, and turned into something useful for the great work I did not yet understand. I had time, not much time, but enough to find out more. The archive stacks of the administratum occupied 3 entire floors of the spire, a labyrinth of data vaults and manuscript storage and maintenance servitor bays that stretched back to the earliest days of imperial colonization. Most administrators never ventured deeper than the first few aisles, where the current year's records were stored in neat, accessible rows. I had spent 31 years filing documents and had never had cause to explore the deeper archives. Now I walked past the current records, past the decade-old records, past the century markers and the security checkpoints, and the dusty corners where the maintenance servitors rarely ventured. The light grew dimmer as I descended. The air grew thicker, heavier, filled with the smell of ancient paper and machine oil and something else. Something that might have been the accumulated weight of centuries of human bureaucracy. I was looking for the original colonization records, the founding documents, the first census of Tertius Prime, conducted 8 centuries ago when the first settlers had carved their living space out of the hostile bedrock. What I found instead was a gap, The records from the founding era were stored in massive data vaults, each one the size of a small hab unit, each one sealed with authentication locks that required 3 separate authorization codes to access. I had 2 of the 3 codes by virtue of my position. The third I acquired by carefully noting the access patterns of the archive maintenance staff, who had been entering and exiting the same vault every 6 hours for the past century. The vault should have contained the original population surveys, the genetic baselines, the initial biological assessments that had established the standard against which all subsequent generations would be measured. It contained nothing. The storage racks were empty. The data crystals had been removed, their housings dark and silent, but the dust patterns told a story. The vault had been entered recently, far more recently than any legitimate archival need would explain. Someone had walked these aisles within the past month, leaving footprints in the accumulated residue of centuries. The footprints led to a secondary storage chamber I had not known existed. The chamber was hidden behind a false wall, its entrance concealed by a maintenance panel that looked exactly like every other maintenance panel in the archive. I found it only because the dust was disturbed around its edges, only because I was looking for something that someone did not want me to find. Inside, the chamber was small, barely larger than my office. It contained a single cogitator terminal, its screen glowing with a faint blue light that seemed almost organic, and it contained the original colonization records. Not copies, not summaries. The actual original documents, handwritten on parchment, that had been made from the skins of the first livestock imported to Tertius Prime. I recognized the authentication seals of the original colonial administratum, the signatures of the first governor, the biological assessment stamps of the founding-era Medicae Corps. I began to read. The first colonists had arrived on Tertius Prime in the 187th year of the 41st millennium, approximately 8 centuries before the current date. They had numbered approximately 15,000 souls, a mix of administrators, workers, and military personnel drawn from a dozen different imperial worlds. Their genetic profiles had been documented, catalogued, and stored for future reference. All of this was exactly as the official histories recorded, but the official histories did not mention the other ship. There had been 2 colony ships in the original fleet, the Blessed Endeavor, which had carried the human colonists, and the Tertius Salvation, which had been listed as a supply vessel, carrying equipment and livestock and the materials necessary to establish a new imperial outpost. The Tertius Salvation had not been a supply vessel. According to the documents before me, the Tertius Salvation had been a quarantine ship. It had been carrying something that the original colonial authority had desperately wanted to study, something that had been captured in the depths of space, in the vast darkness between stars, something that had no name in any human language, something that had been described in the cramped handwriting of a Medicae officer who had clearly been writing in terror, as a biological infiltration organism of previously unknown origin, capable of genetic adaptation, psychological manipulation, and long-term species replacement. The colonial authority had planned to study the organism. They had planned to understand it, to develop countermeasures, perhaps even to weaponize it for use against the enemies of the Imperium. They had failed. The Tertius Salvation had crashed during landing, its wreckage scattered across the northern wastes of the planet. The colonial authority had sent recovery teams to secure the biological specimens. None of the recovery teams had returned. The northern wastes had been declared a quarantine zone. The crash site had been buried under a kilometer of industrial waste. The original colonists had been told that the second ship had been lost with all hands, its cargo destroyed, its very existence classified as a matter of planetary security. But something had survived. Something had found its way into the population. Something had been breeding, adapting, infiltrating for 800 years, and the bloodline of House Whitmore, according to the genetic records I held in my trembling hands, had been among the first to be contaminated. I stood in that hidden chamber, surrounded by the truth that had been buried for centuries, and I understood at last why the governor's great-grandparents had come to Tertius Prime in the first place. They had not been colonists. They had not been administrators, or workers, or military personnel. They had been the creature's first hosts, the founding generation of an infiltration that had been growing in the shadows ever since. The governor was not a fourth-generation hybrid. He was the end result of a breeding program 8 centuries in the making. And I had no idea how deep the contamination went. I took the documents. I did not have time to copy them. I did not have access to secure copying equipment that would not be monitored. I simply gathered the most damning pages, folded them into my uniform, and left the hidden chamber the way I had come. The archive stacks were silent around me. The maintenance servitors went about their eternal tasks, their mechanical arms reaching and filing and organizing with no awareness of the truth that surrounded them. I walked past the century markers and the security checkpoints and the neat rows of current records, and with every step I expected to feel the hands of the governor's agents on my shoulders, to hear the voice of something ancient and hungry speaking my name. But I reached my office without incident. I locked the door, I engaged every security protocol I knew, and I began to write. There were others who needed to know. There had to be others who could act. The Inquisition maintained listening posts on every imperial world. The ecclesiarchy had agents trained specifically to identify and destroy Xenos infiltration. If I could get the information to the right people, if I could make them understand the scope of what had happened here, then perhaps Tertius Prime could still be saved. I worked through the night, composing messages in code, embedding the truth in the dry language of tithe assessments and procurement complaints. I scheduled the messages for delayed transmission, routing them through secure channels that I prayed had not been compromised. I did everything I could think to do. It was not enough. In the morning, Senior Administrator Chen came to my office. She did not knock, she simply entered, using an override code that should not have existed, and she stood in the doorway with that wrong smile on her face and that sweetgrass smell rising from her skin. "Senior Attestant Marsh," she said, "the governor has requested your presence. There is an important matter to discuss regarding your recent archival research." I looked at her, at the thing behind her eyes, moving in the depths of her pupils, at the subtle wrongness of her fingers, too long, too flexible, the joints bending at angles that human joints did not bend. "How long?" I asked. "I'm sorry, how long have you been one of them? Since birth? Since you joined the administration? Since last month?" Chen's smile widened. It kept widening, past the point where human facial muscles should have stopped, until I could see the shapes of secondary. Teeth behind her normal ones, small and sharp and curved inward like the teeth of a trap. "Third generation," she said. "My grandfather was one of the first. He worked very hard to ensure that his children, and his children's children, would be positioned to serve the great work, the unification of this world, the preparation for the coming of our saviors. You must understand, Caroline, I may call you Caroline, yes, that we do not mean humanity harm. We are humanity. We are simply humanity made better, stronger, more unified. When the Star Children come, when they descend to claim what has been prepared for them, there will be no more war, no more conflict, no more suffering. There will be no more humanity. There will be peace." Chen stepped further into my office, and behind her I could see other figures gathering in the corridor, other administrators, other bureaucrats, other faces I had known for decades, now showing the subtle signs of contamination that I had never allowed myself to notice. "The governor was impressed by your thoroughness, you know, your attention to detail. He believes you would make an excellent addition to our community. I would rather die. That is also an option." Chen's smile faded, replaced by something that might have been sorrow, or might have been a creature's approximation of what sorrow should look like. "But it would be a waste. And we have worked so hard to minimize waste. The hive runs so efficiently now, Caroline. The tithe quotas are met every year. The population is stable. Disease is managed. Conflict is minimized. Is that not what the Imperium wants? Is that not what you have devoted your life to achieving?" I thought about the documents in my uniform, the messages I had scheduled for transmission, the truth that was already spreading, even now, through channels that the governor's agents might not have fully compromised. "The Imperium will find out," I said. The Inquisition will come. They will. Burn this world to bedrock rather than let your kind spread. Perhaps. Chen shrugged, and the motion was wrong, her shoulders moving independently in a way that suggested her skeleton was no longer entirely human. But by then, the seeds will have been planted elsewhere. Your shipping manifests are so thorough, Caroline. Your travel permits so carefully documented. You have helped us track every route, every connection, every opportunity for our children to find new homes. My chest went cold, the tithe assessments, the travel permits. The years of careful documentation that I had believed was service to the Emperor, I had been helping them spread for decades. The governor will see you now, Chen said, and the figures in the corridor began to move forward, their steps perfectly synchronized, their faces wearing identical expressions of patient hunger. Please do not make this difficult. There is so much work to be done, and you have always been so very good at work. They took me to the governor's private chambers, not the audience chamber where I had met with him before, but his personal quarters, deep in the secure wing of the spire where only the most trusted servants were permitted to enter. The chambers were wrong, the walls were wrong, the ceiling was wrong. Something had grown over the original architecture, a membranous covering that pulsed with slow biological rhythms, that gave off the sweetgrass smell in waves of nauseating intensity. The furniture had been replaced by growths, organic shapes that served the same functions but were clearly not made by human hands. And in the center of the room, the governor waited. He was no longer pretending. His face had lost its mask of humanity, the skin pulled back to reveal the structure beneath. His skull was elongated, ridged, the bone thick and armored. His eyes had grown, the pale gray irises expanding to fill the entire visible surface, reflecting the biological light of the chamber with an alien luminescence. His hands had sprouted additional fingers, curving talons that clicked against each other as he gestured for me to come closer. "Senior Attestant Marsh," he said, and his voice was no longer human, a harmonic layering of sounds that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. I have so looked forward to this conversation. I was pushed forward by the hands of my former colleagues. I stumbled, caught myself, and stood facing the thing that had ruled my world for 12 years. "You found the archive," the governor said. "You found the truth. I am impressed, truly. Most of your kind never look beyond the surface. They are so content with their documents, their procedures, their comfortable certainties. You killed Marcus. Marcus is not dead. Marcus is with us now, part of the greater whole. He struggled at first, but they always do. Soon he will understand. Soon you will understand." The governor rose from his organic throne and moved toward me, his enhanced form towering over my merely human stature. The smell was overwhelming, a cloud of pheromones that made my thoughts fuzzy, that whispered of belonging and purpose and peace. 4 generations, I said, forcing the words through the growing haze in my mind. 8 centuries. All of this, just for what? For conquest? For survival? The governor's face was close to mine now, close enough that I could see the intricate patterns of scales beneath his skin, the delicate structures that had replaced his human features. "You think we are invaders, but we are refugees. Our ancestors came from the void between stars, fleeing a war you cannot imagine. We did not choose to become what we are. We adapted because we had to. And now you want to consume humanity. We want to become humanity. We want to merge, to blend, to create something new, something that will survive when the Imperium falls, when the enemies you cannot see come to claim everything you have built." The governor touched my face and his. Talons were gentle, almost tender. "You could be part of it, Caroline. Your mind, your skills, your dedication. All of it preserved, enhanced, made eternal. I could feel it now, the thing he was offering, a connection, a purpose. An end to the loneliness that had defined my existence for 31 years. All I had to do was surrender. "My messages," I whispered, "they have already been transmitted. The Inquisition will know. The Ecclesiarchy will know. By tomorrow, every imperial authority in the sector will know what you are." The governor smiled, and it was an alien expression on his alien face, but it was also something like pride. "I know," he said. "We intercepted your transmissions hours ago. Your codes were quite clever, but we have had 8 centuries to study your administrative systems. We know every channel, every protocol, every encryption method. My hope died, my final gambit wasted. But we let one message through, the governor continued. Just one, to a ship that is currently 3 days from the nearest Imperial beacon. A ship carrying a delegation of merchants who are, in fact, our agents, traveling to establish new colonies on distant worlds. Why? Because the Imperium's response will be exactly what we need. They will send inquisitors, they will send armies, they will draw attention to Tertius Prime, and while they are focused here, while they are burning this single hive in righteous fury, our children will be spreading to 100 other worlds, carried by the same shipping routes you documented so carefully. He stepped back, and I saw the other hybrids gathering around me, their faces showing the same patient hunger, the same terrible purpose. You were right that we needed to act quickly, the governor said. Your discovery has accelerated our timeline. The hive will fall, perhaps the planet will fall, but the species will survive, the great work will continue. I understood then. I was not a threat, I was not an obstacle. I was a timer, a trigger, a piece in a game that had been playing for 800 years. I refuse, I said. Whatever you want from me, I refuse, I know. The governor nodded, and there was something almost like respect in his alien eyes. That is why I offer you a choice. You may join us, willingly, and become part of the great work. Your consciousness preserved, your skills put to use, your existence given meaning beyond anything your emperor could offer. Or, we take you anyway, and you experience the process as violation rather than union. The end result is the same, but the journey is far less pleasant. I looked at the faces around me, at Chen, who had worked beside me for 15 years, at the others, dozens of them, senior administrators and junior clerks and maintenance staff, all the ordinary people who had built their lives in service to a system they did not understand. They were not monsters. They were victims, hosts, puppets dancing on strings that had been woven before any of them were born. How many, I asked, in the hive? How many are like you? 17% of the current population shows full genetic integration, the governor replied. Another 43% carry the markers for potential conversion. Within 2 generations, assuming no imperial interference, Tertius Prime would have been entirely ours. I closed my eyes. 17%, millions of people, millions of things wearing human faces, and I had helped them, year after year, document after document, never knowing, never suspecting. I will not join you willingly, I said. Then the process will be painful. But you will understand eventually. They always do. The governor gestured, and the hybrids began to move forward. I felt hands on my arms, my shoulders, my head. I felt needles slide into my skin, delivering compounds that made my muscles go slack and my thoughts scatter like startled birds. But as they carried me toward the organic structures at the back of the chamber, as the sweetgrass smell became a smothering blanket, and the biological rhythms of the walls began to pulse in time with my heartbeat, I saw something the governor had not intended me to see, a secondary cogitator terminal, half concealed by membrane growth, its screen still displaying the message queue I had used to schedule my transmissions. One message had been intercepted. The others, the backups I had routed through maintenance systems, through sewage processing, through the emergency beacon network that even the governor's agents had not fully compromised, were still pending, still waiting for their scheduled delivery time, still carrying the truth to recipients the governor had not considered. I smiled, and the governor saw the smile, and for just a moment there was something like uncertainty in his alien eyes. "What did you do?" he demanded. 31 years, I said, my voice already slurring from the compounds in my blood. 31 years of filing documents, 31 years of learning every system, every backup, every redundancy in Imperial administration. The hybrids were lowering me towards something that opened like a mouth, something wet and warm and filled with structures that were clearly designed to interface with human neurology. "You intercepted the messages you knew about," I continued. "The ones routed through standard channels, the ones you expected an administrator to use. There are no other channels, there are always other channels. Emergency protocols, disaster response systems, maintenance alerts that automatically propagate to orbital stations. I have been filing documents for 31 years, Governor. I know every single way that information moves through this hive. The governor's face twisted, and his voice rose in a harmonic shriek that brought pain to my ears. Stop the process, check the systems, check all of them. But it was too late. I could feel it, even as the organic structure closed around me, even as tendrils began to pierce my skull and chemical compounds began to rewire my thoughts. I could feel the moment when the first of my backup messages reached its destination, when the information began to propagate outward through networks the governor had never known existed. The Inquisition would come, the ecclesiarchy would come, the Imperial Navy would come with fire and fury and the absolute certainty of human survival. Tertius Prime would burn, millions would die, the hive that had been my home for 31 years would become a charred memory, but the truth would spread faster than the governor's children. The other worlds would be warned, the other colonies would be examined, the great work of 8 centuries would be recognized for what it was, and the Imperium would respond as it always responded, with overwhelming force and total destruction. I had not saved my world, I had not saved myself, but I had done my job. I had filed the most important document of my career. The organic structure completed its embrace. I felt the tendrils breach my brain, felt the chemical cascade begin to rewrite my thoughts, felt the beginning of a process that would end with my consciousness absorbed into something vast and patient and very, very old. But before the last of my human thoughts faded, before the sweetgrass smell became everything, and my identity dissolved into the chorus of the hive mind, I had one final moment of clarity. The governor was screaming orders. The hybrids were scrambling to check systems, and somewhere, in the void between stars, Imperial warships were already changing course, already responding to emergency beacons that had been designed for exactly this kind of catastrophe. The great work would continue, perhaps, on other worlds, in other forms, with other hosts. The species would survive. But not here, not on Tertius Prime, not in my hive. The last thing I felt before the transformation claimed me completely was something that might have been satisfaction. Then the tendrils reached the core of my consciousness, and Caroline Marsh ceased to exist as a separate entity. The senior attestant who had served the governor's administration for 31 years became part of the collective, her memories absorbed, her skills incorporated, her identity dissolved into the great biological network that spanned the hive. But the collective felt her final message propagating outward, felt the responding pulse of Imperial attention, felt the first distant rumble of warships breaking from their patrol routes. And for the first time in 800 years, the collective knew fear. The spire was quiet when the first inquisitorial cruiser entered orbit. The great work continued in the depths, in the organic chambers where new hosts were being processed and new agents were being born. The governor issued orders and coordinated responses and prepared evacuation protocols that had been designed centuries ago for exactly this contingency. But the woman who had been Caroline Marsh was no longer capable of independent action. She stood in the processing chamber alongside 17 other newly converted hosts, her body partially transformed, her mind fractured into 1,000 pieces that were slowly being reassembled into something new. The collective tried to access her memories of the emergency protocols, the backup systems, the hidden channels she had used to transmit her final messages. It found only fragments. She had been thorough even in her final moments. She had compartmentalized the information, spread it across parts of her consciousness that the conversion process had already destroyed. The collective learned that she had sent messages to 73 separate destinations. It learned that she had included genetic analysis, bureaucratic evidence, and specific instructions for identifying hybrid infiltrators at every level of Imperial society. It did not learn how to stop the information from spreading. The first bombardment struck the upper spires 3 days after the cruiser arrived. The governor evacuated to the deep warrens, the organic tunnels that had been growing beneath the hive for centuries. The collective followed, carrying its newest members, abandoning the architecture of human civilization for the biological certainty of their true nature. Above them, the Imperium burned everything. The spire of blessed administration collapsed in the first hour. The cathedral of the Emperor's blessed harvest went next, its ancient stones melting in the fury of orbital fire. The nutrient processing district, the corpse starch refineries, the residential blocks where 80 million human beings had lived their brief and brutal lives, all of it became ash, became slag, became a monument to the price of Xenos contamination. The collective survived, fragments of it at least. Seeds scattered through tunnels that the bombardment could not reach, carriers hiding in the spaces between destruction. The great work would continue, diminished but undefeated. But Caroline Marsh was no longer among them. Her body had been in the upper levels when the first shells struck, still undergoing the final stages of conversion, still tethered to the processing architecture that could not be moved. The collective felt her consciousness wink out, a tiny light extinguished in the vast biological network that had almost claimed her. In her final moment, the fragment that had been Caroline Marsh experienced something the collective did not expect. Relief. The bombardment continued for 17 days. When the Imperial forces finally descended to the surface, they found nothing alive in the ruins of Hive Tertius. They found organic residue that would be analyzed and catalogued and added to the Inquisition's ever-growing database of Xenos contamination signatures. They found evidence of an infiltration that had lasted 8 centuries, that had claimed 17% of the population, that had nearly succeeded in its goal of total planetary assimilation. They did not find the governor. They did not find the core of the collective. They did not find the seeds that had already been scattered to other worlds, other hives, other populations waiting to be converted. But they found Caroline Marsh's original transmissions. They found her meticulous documentation, her careful analysis, her 31 years of administrative expertise put to its final, most important use. And in the archives of the Inquisition, in the files that would be used to hunt the collective's children across 1,000 worlds, a single notation was added to the record of Tertius Prime, Senior Attestant Caroline Marsh, 31 years of service, died in faithful execution of duty to the Emperor of Mankind. It was not entirely accurate, but it was close enough.